Well, an idea had been kicking around in my mind since my mid-20s. If you watched my second video, you would have seen that when I was working at uni on my teaching degree, my father shot me down and said that that's fine and well and dandy, but it's not a real job. So ever since that time, I wonder whether there was a kernel of truth in what he said, whether working for the public service and working for yourself meant that there was a vast difference in the work you had to do. Bear in mind that all the males in my family, at least, all worked in small business. My brother, my brother-in-law, my father, and even my nephew more recently. So I had the idea that I would like to start a small business. You could say I wanted to do it out of...
For spite?
For spite.
For spite!
Don't worry, my father and I had long since reconciled since my first teaching job, and we remained very close friends for the rest of his life. In fact, he even helped put together some of the advertising for the new company that I was about to start. Now, one of the things that I'd noticed, because I'd been close friends with the deputy principals, not only in my first teaching job, but in my last video as well, in my second teaching job. And one of the things I noticed was what ticked them off most was having to do things outside work hours, And one of the things that took up a lot of time outside their work hours was finding replacement teachers, casual teachers, supply teachers, relief teachers, whatever country you're from and whatever they're called there. And I thought that this would be a great way to take some of that pressure off. You couldn't leave it to other staff because they also didn't have to work outside hours, and I guess there was more of a... it fell onto the deputy principals because they had a more senior role. So the business started off slowly at first. Within the first year, I think we had probably a school or two, but it grew over time. And the extra time that I got from this enabled me to follow up another idea that I wanted to pursue, and that was writing a book. The idea of writing a book goes back to, I think, my music. And I, as I'd said before, loved music that had a message. And I felt that if there were topics that weren't being talked about, that this was a way to get the message out. I'm not going to bore you with the synopsis of the book here, but I wanted to present it in a non-confrontational, in a unique style, and wrapped up in a fiction story which could let people do their own working out and imagine. Much later, in my 40s, I published this book, which is called Witchcraft, A Stroll Between Worlds. And the idea behind that, the book deals with topics that I talked about in my last video on the clash of cultures and Aboriginal issues that I came across. The fictional story also has the main character who is having fairly lucid dreams about a girl from the 16th century accused of witchcraft. And what is the connection between the two is for you to find out. If it ever becomes a bestseller, I'm sure I will publish the other two as well. This was actually the second book that I'd written. There's a link below if you wish to purchase the book, or you can look it up on Amazon. Now also at this time I was thinking of going and planning for another of my big trips. I also wanted a theme on these trips. I didn't feel I was getting enough from looking at landmarks or by ticking off places on a map. I wanted to understand and feel more of the culture, and I figured the best way to do that would be to do the trip based on a theme. The theme for this trip was another thing that I was really interested in ever since live cams, which were becoming popular back then, was looking at volcanoes. I'd been to Volcano National Park in Hawaii on the Big Island, and that only cemented my fascination for volcanoes. So on this trip I decided that I would go to New Zealand and I would try and look at some of the more famous volcanoes there. Like Tongariro Crossing, there are a number of volcanoes on that walk, and also there was Mount Ruapehu that I also climbed, and I wanted to also go to Vanuatu, which is also famous for a couple of volcanoes. The one that's most famous is Mount Yasur, which I spent a great afternoon filming and photographing, and I could have frankly stayed there for all night without moving, but we were on a back of a tourist truck, so we had to follow the rules. I did actually say, because they'd cut the road off due to weather, so you can normally go right to the top, but it wasn't permitted. So I said, well, what about if I walk up there? And the guide laughed at me and said, yeah, go ahead, I'll see you tomorrow. So I thought, yeah, probably not the smartest idea. I also took a flight to Ambram Island, which has the whole island is basically volcanic, and it has incredible lava lakes, or it did back then. Actually, one's just come back, I believe, but they did back then. So I trekked through miles of jungle and made it up onto the lava fields, and slowly made our way over to the actual craters of Marram and Bembo. And I stood on the edge of those craters, and I was stunned by the sound that the lava lake was making. It's almost identical to a large ocean swell, except for one thing: your brain is wired to hear the wash back of the wave crashing. In this instance, all you could hear was the wave crashing and no retreat at all. It just was bang, bang, and it was fabulous. A spectacular sight. Absolutely, puts yourself into scale with Mother Nature. And that brings me to our unique experience of this particular video. For me, seeing Mother Nature at its rawest, when it's doing what it does naturally, really does put your life and put your problems into perspective, when you can see and forever remember just how huge and mighty it is when Mother Nature shows herself. We take it for granted and we think it's beautiful like this all the time, but when you see either tornadoes or volcanoes or giant swells, tsunamis, these things, although destructive as well, are also part of the natural cycle. And they become they were always, even though they're hard to find, they're very unique experiences in life. But I'd soon returned home and life had taken up its normal routine. And in your 30s, at this stage, that really meant that people had bought their homes, they were raising their families, and they were becoming just like my parents, probably just like most people. And I think the worst part of that was that I was starting to feel that pressure too, that pressure to conform, to keep up with the Joneses. If you don't measure up and have those things, what does that say about you? And I'd also started to pretty much convince myself that I was no different and I was going to, I don't know, I'd put up the good fight. I had tried to do things differently. I had taken off and I had tried to buck the system. But inevitably time catches up with you, and it was time to just give up and settle down. I really just don't like myself for this period of my life, because it was such a lack of belief in the things that were true to me. I started to play cricket to fill in time as well, which, you know, I enjoyed. It's fun playing sport, and that would take up my weekends, and I could then listen to my peers who are also starting their family lives. And yeah, I just felt like you can't fight the system at all and do anything about that. I looked in the mirror in my 30s and I didn't like what I saw anymore.
When you're younger, you can eat what you like, drink what you like, and still climb into your 26-inch waist trousers and zip them closed. Then you reach that age, 24, 25, your muscles give up, they wave a little white flag, and without any warning at all, you're suddenly a fat bastard.
It seemed the race was run. My trips seemed to happen every decade or so, and the maths on that doesn't work out too well in life for having a chance to see the world and really experience it, because I knew that what I loved the most wasn't the things that I'd mentioned before, it was the culture that you could experience when you lived overseas. The problem was, in the early 2000s, the chances of working and living overseas for the average guy, they weren't that great. There just wasn't that much opportunity. The best way that most people did back then was to get a hereditary passport based on either, I think, your father or your grandfather, and most of those were of British heritage, so people would use those passports to go live in England, and then obviously move on and travel around Europe. But I didn't want that. I wanted to work in the United States, and getting a visa for the United States, as I'm sure you're aware, is just not easy to work. So I felt absolutely at a dead end. And I pretty much resigned myself to this fate. I decided that the business was now getting to a stage where I could think about franchising it. And that was something that I decided to enroll in, do some classes on. I prepared a manual for this purpose and started to go to class, but I went to the first class and I remember sitting there staring at the wall, wondering what the hell was I doing here? This is not what I wanted to do. By this stage, I'd already earned more than I'd earned as a teacher, so I felt like I'd ticked off that goal, that I had proven that I could start a business and run a business and earn a decent wage out of it. And I was done. It was like that old Bruce Springsteen song about glory days. You know, time slips away and leaves you with nothing, mister, but boring stories of glory days.
So, have you seen Father Shortall lately? No.
And it's not that I didn't appreciate the opportunity, the comfort, the security, the safety. I had 3 close friends, and it was fantastic because you could, if you split it up, you could see one a month and see one friend after 3 months, and then you had something to talk about, and we'd swap places. We go from my place to their place, and it was great. But I sort of started thinking that's probably the reason I'm here. That's the reason I'm existing, to do that and to keep the wheels turning and keep making money. It's funny, I started my 30s trying to live up to my father's expectations, and I ended up trying to live up to my own. So how was I going to break out of this malaise? Well, you'll have to wait till next time. Till then, have fun.